Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We all like to think that when a manager sits down to evaluate an employee, they can neatly compartmentalize the different parts of that person's job. But, well, human psychology is rarely that tidy, right? So let's explore whether the metrics we use to judge workplace performance are really as separate as we like to think they are. Now, are performance reviews ever truly objective? We desperately want to believe we can look at an employee's hard numbers without letting it cloud our judgment of their soft skills. Like, if someone is an absolute rock star in sales but just an okay administrator, we assume a good, experienced manager can rate them exactly like that, separating the two tasks perfectly. But does that actually happen, or does one metric inevitably bleed into the other and completely warp the final review? While a totally fascinating study by Jasmine C. Bowl and Stephen D. Smith puts that corporate belief to the ultimate test with an incredibly clever experiment. Published by the American Accounting Association, this research looks at exactly what happens when managers are handed both objective data and subjective tasks. It asks a pretty pointed question: can the human brain actually keep these two things from infecting each other? Which brings us to part one, the setup: objective versus subjective. To figure this out, researchers grabbed 216 veteran university supervisors. We're talking folks with an average of 13 years of management experience. They asked them to step into a hypothetical role as a regional director evaluating a district manager. Picture this: you're evaluating this employee on two completely independent tracks. First, you got hard, objective, contractable sales data. Pure numbers. You hit your quota or you didn't. Second, you have subjective office administration skills. This is all about personal impressions, teamwork, organization, basically just not microwaving fish in the break room. The researchers made it absolutely crystal clear. These two functions are totally unrelated. Crushing it in sales does not inherently make you a great administrator. The setup is simple, but honestly, it's brilliant. Step 1, you review their objective sales numbers. Step 2, you read standardized personal notes and staff interview transcripts about the manager's office administration performance. Now, here's the trick. Every single participant read the exact same notes about the employee's admin skills, and those notes were specifically designed to reflect perfectly average performance. Then, step 3, you assign a subjective score for their soft skills on a scale from 0 to 10. Okay, moving right along to part 2. The spillover effect, unintentional bias. Let's see what actually happens here. Remember, every single supervisor read the exact same notes about an average administrator. The only thing that changed was that objective sales number they saw in step 1. And wow, the researchers found clear evidence of cognitive distortion. This is where the hard numbers act as a subconscious anchor for literally everything else. Evaluators unintentionally bias their subjective evaluations just to make them consistent with a totally unrelated objective performance. It's Psychology 101. Information you observe early on creates a bias. Essentially, once you see a high or low sales number, it completely colors how your brain encodes and interprets the subsequent information about their administrative skills. The proof is right here in the data. Even though those admin notes were identical across the board, supervisors gave a much higher subjective score to managers who absolutely crushed their sales goals. When the objective sales were high, the subjective admin score averaged a 6.90. But when sales were down, that exact same administrative performance, literally the identical behavior, plummeted to a 5.42. It was viewed as significantly worse just because the employee's sales numbers were lower. Wild, right? So the crucial point here is that objective success essentially spills over. It creates this undeniable halo effect on entirely unrelated subjective tasks. As the researchers directly put it, supervisors' subjective evaluations are directionally influenced by an accompanying objective measure of sales performance. Basically, even when we consciously know the tasks are separate, our cognitive limitations just prevent us from completely isolating our judgments. But wait, it gets better. Part 3. The role of luck, the controllability twist. The researchers didn't just stop there. They threw a major plot twist into the experiment: uncontrollable luck. They wanted to test a concept called controllability. Like, what happens to that objective sales number when a major client opens or closes a facility and it is entirely outside the manager's control? They introduced a scenario where a totally uncontrollable event massively shifted the sales numbers. In one setup, bad luck. A facility unexpectedly closes, tanking sales. In another, good luck. A facility opens and sales skyrocket. Keep in mind, the employee's actual day-to-day effort didn't change one bit. Only their circumstances did.
This brings us to a super fascinating question that really gets to the heart of workplace psychology. Do managers adjust evaluations for luck? If an employee's numbers tanked or skyrocketed purely because of a random break, do you think supervisors consciously tried to fix it in the subjective review? If you know the sales metric isn't a fair reflection of their actual hard work, will you use your subjective power to right that wrong?
Let's find out in Part 4, the fairness adjustment, a human response. Check this out. When a manager suffered bad luck, meaning their sales were low, but everyone knew it absolutely wasn't their fault, supervisors artificially boosted their subjective admin score. They bumped it up from a 5.00 to a 5.82 to effectively compensate them. The evaluators realized the objective measure was unfairly punishing the employee. So what did they do? They used the only tool they had available, their subjective discretion on a totally unrelated task, to offset that bias and make the overall evaluation feel more fair. And this brilliantly illustrates the asymmetry of it all. When an employee's sales were artificially high due to a stroke of purely good luck, managers didn't feel the need to correct the score downward to reflect reality. Nope, they just let them keep the win. The subjective scores remained effectively identical, 6.90 versus 6.89.
So what does all this behavior actually tell us? Well, supervisors are basically acting as a psychological shield. They use their subjective discretion to protect employees against downside risk while totally letting them keep the benefits of upside risk. They do something the researchers call using borrowed discretion. They literally borrow the discretionary power meant for evaluating office administration just to correct a perceived flaw in the objective sales data. The researchers theorize that this happens because supervisors are highly motivated to maintain the employee's morale and overall sense of fairness. Think about it. If an employee feels robbed by an uncontrollable event, their satisfaction is going to drop and their motivation will tank. By adjusting that subjective score upward, the manager is essentially protecting the employee's drive. They're making sure the employee still feels valued by the organization. Looking at the actual plotted data from the study, you can visually see this fairness gap appear the absolute second a worker's environment becomes uncontrollable. See that upward slope on the bottom dashed line? That is supervisors actively closing the evaluation gap to rescue the employee who just had bad luck. Meanwhile, the top dashed line stays totally flat, leaving the lucky employee sitting right where they are. The overarching takeaway from this whole explainer is that our human brains simply cannot keep objective data and subjective impressions completely separated. Whether it's an unintentional cognitive distortion dragging our opinions toward the hard numbers, or a highly conscious fairness adjustment designed to protect employee morale, the lines are always blurred. It just proves that designing a perfect performance measurement system isn't really an accounting problem, it's a deeply human one. I'll leave you with this provocative question to ask yourself before your next round of performance reviews. Next time you evaluate an employee, are you truly measuring their independent performance across the board? Or, without even realizing it, are you just grading their sales numbers twice? Or maybe quietly correcting their bad luck? It's definitely something every manager should think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the metrics, and I'll see you next time.